Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Still heartbroken over what happened over the weekend from what Arkansas to Kentucky. Some 128 miles of continuous tornado. 150 to 165 mile an hour winds, basically just ripping and shredding communities. And for me, I keep seeing these stories, these horrible tragedy of places that didn't have lots of wealth, didn't have the kind of infrastructure that you need to deal with this stuff. These were poor working class communities that have been devastated. And for me, the stories that have been grabbing my attention, and this is the infuriating part of the world in which we live in. And again, one of these things that I think can and should be addressed. But I'm looking at this Amazon warehouse in Illinois. I'm looking at this candle factory in Kentucky, this Mayfield Consumer Products. I guess it was in Mayfield, Kentucky. And I'm looking at the stories coming out of these places. I talked a little bit about this yesterday. That they were somehow, that management somehow felt empowered to threaten them to stay when all of the weather reports pretty much pinned this down to the time that it was going to happen. And the stories that we're hearing now that, you've got all these workers who weren't allowed to have their phones, there's no way to communicate with people. And of course, the employer being the gatekeeper, lots of things popping up. In fact, OSHA has said that they're going to begin an investigation into what happened at that Amazon warehouse that killed 6 workers. And I know what's going to happen in this. And this is the sad reality of the world we're in. There'll be a little slap on the wrist, fine, oh, don't do it again. They'll blame something, a contractor, for it not being, sturdy enough to withstand. And there'll always be a reason. These people should not have been there. And as I was sitting, thinking about this today, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I've been very fortunate in my work life to always have a union contract. And you go, oh, come on, Rick, I've always had the sense of empowerment that comes with that I don't think a lot of people understand, especially if you've never been a union member or been around it. And I was telling the story today of when my mother-in-law passed. We were waiting for her last breath. I mean, she was on death's door. We were waiting for days, and it was torturous. It was just standing, waiting for that last breath. And I said to my wife, I go, I'm just going to go to work. I don't want to waste all of my vacation days and all of the stuff just standing here. We need to there'll be things on the other side of her passing. And she's like, yeah, go do what you're going to do. So I got to work and I said, hey, look, this is what's going on. There's a good chance that she's not going to make it the day. If I get a phone call, I'm punching out and going home at that moment. And there was no response. It was I was informing them of what was going to happen. Well, an hour left in the shift. The phone rings. Hey, Rick, come to the office. It's my wife. Her mother's passed. I'm like, okay, I'm on my way. I turned. I told the supervisor, I'm leaving. I swiped the clock and I left. He's whoa, where are you going? He goes, there's only an hour left. I go, yeah, I'll be at home by then. He goes, but you're not done yet. I go, well, somebody else can do that. I'll see you in a couple of days. Now, most people don't think they have that ability because they don't. In a non-union setting, you're an at-will employee. If you did that, they would say, just keep going. And I've heard that story from hundreds of people, that when these things come up, there's no recourse but to show up and do the work. That work comes first, because if you don't, I look at this scenario. These supervisors are telling these people, if you go home, you go to be with your family in this emergency moment, we are going to discipline you and possibly fire you. So now these folks are put in this tenuous situation where, do I stay and work and keep my job so that I don't lose my house? Or do I go home with my family and watch my house be just blown away? And sadly, to me, I can't get past this today. Because as I said, I've been very fortunate in this world of my family does come first and work comes second. Now, the story goes like this. I went back to work after a couple of days because our contract gives us a couple of days for bereavement. And, when I got back, there was no discipline waiting for me. There was no anything, because the company knew that had they tried to give me some discipline, we had a grievance procedure in place. And that you would go to a panel and they would be ridiculed. This would not be something you want to bring in front of somebody with a straight face, because it would be thrown out immediately with prejudice. And it's these moments where you go, this is why having that voice is so important. Let me say this clearly. No one should have been at work that day. People should have been at home with their families, preparing, holding down the fort, getting out of Dodge, doing what they have to do to keep themselves, their families, and their communities safe. I'm sorry, making sure that someone has a scented candle for Christmas, that is not on the list of importance when a tornado with 165-mile-an-hour winds coming through the neighborhood. Sorry, don't think those scented candles are going to be around very long. But what we've done in this country, and this again is another example of what low-wage America has to deal with each and every day. And look, it's not as big as a massive tornado. It's not as big as a 128-mile long tornado with winds of 150 to 165 miles an hour. It's usually not that big. It's usually little, small things. The kid is sick at school. I need to go get them. Sorry, I can't. What am I going to do? It's all of these little situations that train us to believe, well, sorry, family second. And it's when I look at this stuff, you go, really? Amazon one day to make sure that these people's families are safe? And the fact that 6 workers died, do you think they care? No, not really. And this is where I go, I truly don't believe they do. I don't believe they care. The 8 people who died at the candle place, this Mayfield Consumer Products. This company's probably just going to end up filing bankruptcy. What's going to happen to them? Nothing. Now, a listener said, hey, what you need to do is you need to dissolve these corporations, these criminals, expropriate all of the assets, redistribute them to the displaced workers, jail the executives in management who did this, put them in jail pending trial for criminal negligence, voluntary manslaughter, and other applicable charges. And you go, we don't do that stuff. We don't hold them accountable at this level. And that's the thing that's frustrating to me, because everything that happens, ends up on the side of corporate interest. Our courts don't hold them accountable. Think of the last time they collapsed our economy. Think of any time they collapsed our economy. Any of them held accountable? No. Oops, we're sorry. We'll post a notice next time. So for me, the message out of this, and I keep coming back to this voice on the job thing, this ability to have some say, because I truly don't understand putting yourself in a situation where you don't. And while, the story of that one moment, years ago, came back to me as an afterthought, I'm going, I didn't even think about that. That was reflexive. That was, You're not going to stop me because I have other responsibilities. It's an interesting place that we're in this country. And look, I'm thrilled that we're in a moment where workers are a little more militant. We're seeing the Great Resignation. We're seeing companies now going, oh well, how do we keep people? In fact, I was reading over at Inc.com. They had a story on how to keep workers from resigning, and a big part of it was finding out what their concerns are, finding out what the morale is, finding out how to do all of this stuff to make them feel that they're part of something, that their voice matters, that they're empowered. All of these things that I take for granted. All of these things that throughout my work life, I've been very fortunate to go, no, that's what I demand. It's not what I'm willing to accept. It's what I demand. And I find it interesting that they're saying, instead of having exit interviews with your employees, to sit down and have stay interviews. I'm going, oh, you're just going to change the name. Interesting. But it tells me we're in a moment. And there's some learning opportunities here. It tells me we are in a moment where employers even realize there's something going on. There's something amiss. I was watching a couple of these videos that you get on TikTok or Instagram, and it's a guy talking about how to keep your employees happy, and how to keep employees, and what to expect from them. And they were talking to a bunch of the owners, and the guy goes, how many people expect your employees to do as much as you do? And all of them raise their hand. Yes, I expect them to do as much as I do. And he goes, why? You own the company. You are supposed to do more than they are. You're supposed to make them happy, not them make you happy. And that was an old school idea, which is why employers did, in the old days, used to treat their people a little bit better. Not so old, though. I go back to my grandparents' generation, where, there were turkeys at Thanksgiving, there were hams at Christmas, there were bonuses, there were all kinds of things to keep people from moving around. Are we heading back to that? I hope so. I hope we have a labor department that's going to hold these people accountable, and I hope we don't see many more. I hope they'll learn the lesson out of this tragedy is for working people to go, we shouldn't be bullied into staying in a place where it could cost us our lives. Now, I had someone tell me, well, some of them volunteered to stay, and that's their choice. If I'm the employer, I say, we're shutting down. You need to go home for your safety. You need to do this. I don't know that's going to happen. Because we're in this place of, profit over people at every turn. Gotta make the customer happy. And your safety, your well-being as a worker, always second. So going to be interesting to see what the NLRB or what OSHA does in this, and if there are any fines. Now this, trust me, going to be a year or two down the line before we find anything about it. But going to be interesting to see where this goes. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful with this administration, with the Biden administration, that has been, in my view, very worker friendly. The people that they've put into positions of authority in regulatory spots, I'm not unhappy with. I like what they've done with the NLRB. I liked some of the people they've put in it over at OSHA. There's still some work to do to weed out some of the former guys' people. But moving in a direction that is going to be helpful to working people, in a direction that's going to make sure that people are safe on the job. We'll see. Now, of course, it was a natural disaster, Rick. The companies, they shouldn't be responsible for that. Yeah, I'm not buying it. I would love to hear your stories, though. Have you ever been in one of those situations? Have you ever been in a position where, you've had a boss tell you, hey, you're not going anywhere. You're going to stay and you're going to finish this. Has that ever happened? I can think back to a couple of times in my life, And that was before I had a union, before I was in the union. I was a casual for a while. And there were times where if you came in on Saturday morning, you could be there till Sunday afternoon because you had the option to leave. They would just never bring you back. And I remember those days. Now, granted, during that time, I was poor and I was much younger and wanted the money, and I would have stayed anyway. But that's a different story. The fact that they had that power to be able to do that should be angering to people and should be something that we say shouldn't be allowed. Now, good news. There's a bill banging around the House of Representatives that's got 100 co-sponsors. Nowhere near being able to pass, but it's being discussed. The idea of changing the 40-hour work week to a 32-hour work week. Now, there have been some places that have done this, and I remember, when John Huntsman was governor of Utah, they went to a 4 10-hour day work week, and they found people were much more efficient. They found absenteeism went way down. And they found that they were able to save a boatload of money on utilities and all kinds of things by being able to shut the offices down. Now, people were a little upset that, hey, on Fridays nobody was there, but you kind of got used to it. You kind of adjusted to, maybe I better call at 5 o'clock on a Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. Maybe those extra 2 hours gave you a chance. But we can do different things. And I've been calling for the 32-hour work week forever. Now, I would like to say that I would like it to be in the same way that the people who were fighting for the 12-hour day and then the 10-hour day and then the 8-hour day, what they fought for was, yes, we want to work an 8-hour day, but we want to get paid for the same money that we were making at 10 hours so that we don't end up just going, oh, well, we're still working the same amount of hours, just making, the same money. This has got to come with a big raise in the minimum wage so that wages do go up and that employers use people a little smarter. But I'm thrilled to see that people are talking about how do we move this forward? How do we become more family-centric? And how do we give people an opportunity to make a living and still live? And I think of an old Romanian guy that I used to know years and years ago who said when he came to the U.S. to become a citizen, finally he was going to be able to live. Because when he was in Romania, he lived to work. Here, he worked to live. I think we need to go back to those ideals. Just my thought. Love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Gonna take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people at the top. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1852. That was the day socialist leader Daniel de Leon was born in Curaçao to Dutch Jewish parents. As a young man, he traveled Europe. He settled in New York City and earned a law degree from Columbia University in 1878. De Leon joined the Socialist Labor Party in 1890 and became the editor of its newspaper, The People. His book, Socialist Landmarks, consisting of a series of lectures, became wildly popular. These lectures included Reform or Revolution, What Means This Strike, The Burning Question of Trade Unionism, and Socialist Reconstruction of Society. De Leon warned of reforms under capitalism as illusory. He argued for revolutionary socialism and soon assumed leadership of the Socialist Labor Party. As a former member of the Knights of Labor, he was critical of the American labor movement, often referring to the AFL as the American separation of labor for its business unionism and refusal to organize any but the most highly skilled white craft workers. De Leon also took a strong stand against racism in the socialist movement, stating, quote, "Why should a truly socialist organization of whites not take in Negro members, but organize these in separate bodies? On account of outside prejudice, then the body is not truly socialist." De Leon was among the socialist leaders at the founding 1905 Conference of the Industrial Workers of the World. By 1908, he and others looked to effect social change through the Socialist Party and existing trade union movement. This put them at odds with the direct action perspective of the IWW. Many left the IWW at this point, including De Leon and socialist leader Eugene V. Debs. When he died in 1914, more than 30,000 turned out for his funeral. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Liz Cheney got the starring role, and I got to tell you, I'm a little, I don't know, concerned about putting Liz Cheney out in the front, because are we making her the Republicans', 2028 presidential nominee? Are we making her, putting her on another level once the Republican Party finally turns on the former guy? Is she now going to be the front runner? I'm sure that's her plans. But the texts that she was reading, Dumb Jr., his statements, all of the statements from the Fox News people. And look, we always knew that Fox News played a really important role in this administration. But the fact that they're texting in real time to the chief of staff to tell him what to do, wow. And here to share some thoughts on just how wow that really is, I've asked our good friend Kevin Gannon to come talk with us. Kevin's a professor of history and the director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning at Grandview University. Kevin, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks, Rick. Great to be with you again.
So, I'm looking at the Liz Cheney's, texts and all the things that came out of this, and this cozy relationship that they can just, they're just texting each other like they're old buddies, hanging out, having beers. Is that too cozy, do you think?
Well, I think it should be something that makes us uncomfortable. And by us, I mean people who favor a functioning democracy, right? Because it's not just media. I think one of the traps we fall into is we say, oh, well, the Trump administration had a cozy relationship with media. Well, Fox News is a different kind. I mean, it's a propaganda arm, right? And it basically acted as the state media for the Trump administration. And so when you look at the way that authoritarian regimes operate from the 19th into the 20th century, that's a distinguishing characteristic, right? The sort of quasi-official agency that sets this narrative and that has enormous pull, like a shadow cabinet behind the scenes. And one thing I thought was really interesting about that I'm not seeing emphasized as much is, it's shocking to see the text. It's shocking to see this unfold in real time. And you're sort of scratching your head saying, how do these people just have all this influence? But look at what they're texting. They're not saying, hey, this is bad for democracy, or, hey, this is an awful thing and Congress people are under threat. They're saying this looks bad. The optics aren't good. This is going to tar your legacy, right? Like, it's all about optics and spin and what's good for Trump. There's no concern, at least in the messages that I've read or that I've heard, there's no concern at all of the fact that, this is an insurrection, right? And that level of disconnect and what it says about this sort of very tight bubble that Fox has created, this sort of epistemic bubble, that to me is the real concerning element out of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, all of these talking heads, and look, the right wing has done a masterful job of creating this. They've created this massive, powerful echo chamber from dominating almost all of talk radio to cable news to the online space. They have spent time, resource, and money attracting the best talent to spread the best propaganda. I mean, I watched Sean Hannity interview Mark Meadows, and it was really the most shameless defense of the texts that were being sent out, and really the most dismissive, so that the audience is, this isn't a big deal. This is just Democrats playing a game. No, this was a Republican Party trying to overthrow the will of we the people. That is a pretty big, to use a Joe Biden line, it's a BFD, man.
Yeah, it is. And, there are parallels with this in U.S. history, right? That, people talk about the failure of Reconstruction after the Civil War. And yes, Reconstruction was resisted by revanchist white Southerners, by terrorist groups like the Klan, by, Democrat politicians in the South back when the Democratic Party was the party of the Confederacy, right? But that's not all that overthrew Reconstruction. Reconstruction ultimately failed because that stuff outweighed the commitment and the political will to keep Reconstruction going, to sustain it. And so that's, you see this here. Democracy doesn't die in like one big fell swoop.
Right.
Democracy dies piece by piece when people sort of just say, that's how it, fatalism, cynicism, detachment, whatever. But, what we're seeing now is there should be a 5 alarm fire in Congress from the Democratic side, at least. And you're seeing emphasis on formalism and procedure and norms as if, the last 4 years haven't proven the bankruptcy of those.
Yeah.
That's how democracy dies. Piece by piece, and apathy, and sort of a ho-hum business as usual. Scholars of fascism will tell you, like, you don't wake up one day in a fascist state, right? And there's no big announcement that says, hello, we're authoritarians now.
Right.
You're still going to watch TV. You're still going to go to work. You're still going to get pizza delivered. Everyday life will go on. But the context in which it unfolds, look at where we are now compared to where we were in 2015. And it's an eon's worth, figuratively speaking, but not by much, right, of change that's occurred. Look where we are now versus where we were in 2015 in terms of the health of our democracy. And then ask yourself, if that doesn't alarm you, I'm not quite sure what would.
No. I mean, the criming that they used to do back then, they at least tried to cover up and justify.
Right.
Today, it's right out in front of us. They literally wrote their treason down in memos. We have
they
in
made a
writing.
PowerPoint.
In PowerPoint on memos, we have in writing. They videotaped their treason. And they're trying to tell us that, no, that wasn't what that was. That was really something else. And the reality is, it was what it was. They wanted to overthrow the will of the people. It was that simple.
Right. And they're counting on the fact that there's so many folks who'd be like, it could never happen here. Like, just the horror that someone in the U.S. would confront the idea of a coup. That's what happens in third world countries, right? That's what we outsource. We don't do that at home.
Right.
But that's what it is. By any objective standard, that's exactly what occurred. And there's this weird sort of out-of-body experience now for those of us who are trying to call it what it is, and seeing this sort of either indifference or lack of urgency on the part of folks who were elected to boldly lead and not be the previous administration. It's an absolute bizarro world right now, and it's really discouraging.
No, I say this is something that started years and years ago. This was the kickoff of the Heritage Foundation back in the early 70s. Mm-hmm. All of the infrastructure that they built around Lewis Powell's memo, the treatise on how to save free enterprise, the investment that corporate America made in breaking unions and destroying regulations. And this has all been about corporatocracy. This has all been about the moneyed interest getting more. And how they do that is they got to tear us apart. And the Reagan Revolution was all about ripping the Democratic Party's base, the working class, to shreds. And he did just that.
Yeah, anti-unionism was the leading edge of this, right? I mean, you'll remember when Paul Weyrich, addressed where he said, I don't want too many people to vote. Frankly, I want fewer people to vote. This has been out in the open for anyone who's bothered to be listening for decades. And, part of you say it, you ask yourself, am I the only one who sees this, right? And that's how effective this has all been. Those of us who've observed this, who've seen this, and are trying to explain what's going on, we're the ones who sound like the tinfoil hat wearers, right? Yep. It's this crazy upside down world, and it's frightening, because when things become unmoored like that, you're at a real problematic state in terms of keeping your functioning democracy democratic.
No, I mean, the joke back in the '92 election, I think it was Molly Ivins, the writer from Texas, who when observing Pat Buchanan's presidential speeches, said those were much better in their original German, because he was the extreme back then. Today, I think he'd be moderate, considered a moderate. He wouldn't be a Republican today, which is a weird kind of place to be.
Well, look at who is being lifted up as the statesman in the Republican Party. The good Republicans. I mean, it's Kinzinger, who voted with Trump over 90% of the time and favors voter disfranchisement. Liz Cheney, like you were saying, has become the hero, sort of like Mitt Romney was the good Republican back in the second impeachment hearing. And there's this desperate craving on the part of most of your legacy media to cling to this fiction that we have a viable two-party system that functions like it always has. And we don't. We have one coalition, the Democratic Party, and we have an authoritarian group.
Yeah.
That's not a party system.
No,
That's a hostage situation.
it's scary stuff. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're with Kevin Gannon. Kevin's a professor of history and the director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning there at Grandview University. I'm looking at this moment, and there are a lot of parallels back to the fascist era of the past. And I hate to bring up the Nazi stuff. I've had people say, this is the Reichstag thing, and I'm going, no, I think this is earlier. I think we've got some real problems in the building of this. Because people want trains to run on time. We want safety and security, which is the message we keep hearing from the folks on the right, which is, you want to be safe, don't you? Well, those Democrats can't do it. You want to make a lot of money, don't you? Well, they're going to tax you. It's all about that kind of division and fear more than anything. And sadly, it works.
Yeah. If you're conditioned to see anybody different from you or anything that makes you uncomfortable as an existential threat, as a mortal threat, you're never going to put your weapons down. And that's what we've got, right? We've got weaponized political culture now where so many folks, in particular white folks, are afraid to put down the weapons. And that's why this right-wing appeal is so successful. You don't even, if you want to stay at home in the US for the parallels, look at, the years after Reconstruction when the Supreme Court redefined Reconstruction amendments to be more corporate friendly than civil rights friendly, when Jim Crow rises throughout the South, when the Klan is resurgent and marching down the streets of Washington, D.C. in the early 20th century. Things were okay economically. The US was expanding overseas. All of these things were occurring, but yet at the same time, you had basically racist authoritarianism, and the mainstream was okay with that.
Yeah.
And so we see that happen today too. That's a really, really dangerous thing. And the parallels are ominous. You don't even have to go to the Germans, because the Germans copied a lot of what they did from the laws that the US passed in the aftermath of Reconstruction.
Not surprising.
Always been enemy.
Yeah, but I guess I look at this and I'm like, am I surprised that we would accept that we would accept the corporatocracy? Because we already believe, we've been sold the idea that there's the benevolent corporation, that if we give them enough power and enough wealth, that things are going to trickle down like rivers of gold and honey, and we'll be just fine. And yet every day we see that not being true. And I point to what's going on, in Kentucky and in Illinois, where you had this candle factory who's threatening to fire people if they go home to their families. Same thing, supposedly at the Amazon plant there in Illinois. And I'm going, this is corporate power run amok. Right. So for me, the answer in all of this is we got to figure out how to put down our divides and figure out how we take on corporate America. It's not even the Republicans I'm afraid of. It's the corporate Supreme Court. It's the corporate court system. It's the corporate party and the Democratic side, for that matter. It's the moneyed interest. This isn't right or left. This is top down.
And what it's done is, the reason we don't see as much resistance or overt opposition is so many people just feel detached and disfranchised. Like, why even bother at this point? It's defeatism. And that's, of course, corporate strategy being successful, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's not that you don't see any resistance. It's the lack of will to even resist.
And it goes back to what you said about Paul Weyrich. 1980, that comment was made to 20,000 Baptist ministers in Texas. Where he's saying, look, we don't want everybody to vote. We just want our people to vote. Right. Our leverage goes up as the voting populace goes down, was his exact words. Because they understood that politically they had to take over the court system. And give them credit. You read that 1971 Powell memo. You listen to the things that the Heritage Foundation has put out. Their playbook, they have executed to the T, because ultimately the moneyed interests want it.
Right. Because order is good for business. Liberty's messy. Freedom and individuality's messy. Order, you can set your watch by it.
The trains are going to run on time, won't they? So you're, as a historian, as someone who has studied the past, and we're told that if you don't learn from the past, you're doomed to repeat the future. How doomed are we?
I try to remain optimistic in this, but it's really tough in this climate. Gramsci wrote, optimism, pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. Like, the signs are so bad. This is the frog in boiling water moment. Water's been boiling for a while, right? It's what I worry about is that with this massive disenfranchisement and the way that people feel detached from governance, what you're going to have when the breaking strain finally approaches is violence and upheaval. rather than change through the formal political process.
Yeah.
And when you have violence and upheaval, that's leveraged by the right to say, see, we told you these people were unsafe. See, we told you that we should be the ones in charge. And that's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that, because we can see this with January 6th, right? There seems to be this sense that, the folks thought that Antifa was going to show up on January 6th, and that would be the pretext for Trump to declare an emergency and for them to suspend the ratification of the electoral votes. And the fact that Antifa didn't show up, of course, it changes that whole plan. I think there's hints that that's what the right is looking for. They're spoiling for a fight to leverage that. And so I think we're at a very delicate moment where the conditions are very ripe for that sort of thing. But there's also a really organized bloc on the right that's ready to leverage that.
Oh, no. And look, I completely agree with you. I think we've got a country, a large portion in this country who want to be Kyle Rittenhouse. They want to find that trouble so that they can put it down. Because to me, the whole thing about the Rittenhouse thing is he went looking for trouble. He found trouble.
Right.
And we said it's okay to do that, which is frightening.
Well, and that's, look at the way that the right, and in particular white supremacist and neo-Nazi groups, have infiltrated law enforcement. The only difference between them and Kyle Rittenhouse is they had a badge and a license.
Yeah, excellent point.
And and they're spoiling for a fight too. I think this is a real pervasive thing that, it's the metaphor that historians use is the powder keg, right? We're sitting on top of it and the one spark sets it off. And I hope it doesn't blow like, the image would suggest that it does. But we are in a really dangerous moment. And it behooves all of us as citizens who care about the functioning of the society in any sort of just and equitable way to be invested in holding our elected officials accountable, in participating in the process, not just in formal voting, but supporting unions, supporting people on the front lines, supporting the groups that are leveraging change, because that's the counterweight right now. And they need all the help that they can get.
Yeah, and we need a voting rights bill. So last minute I got, I'm looking at, what needs to be done, and nothing more important in my view than to secure the right to vote, because, I'm of the mindset this could be our last fair, free, open election if things don't go somewhat right in the Senate.
Yeah, with no voting rights bill right now, we will not have free, open elections in the future.
And you don't see that as hyperbole?
No, I don't. I think we are at that point. Without national protection for voting rights legislation, that, the Supreme Court is obviously not the branch of the national government that's going to do it. It's up to Congress. This is the big screaming, alarm right now. Without that, nothing else gets fixed. Everything else gets worse. It really is, when we get down to it, that simple.
Scary, scary stuff. Kevin, I appreciate you taking some time for us, sharing some of your expertise. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rick. Pleasure to be with you.
As always, great stuff. Our good friend Kevin Gannon, professor of history and the director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching there at Grandview University. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1995. That was the day machinists at Boeing ended their 69-day strike. 33,000 workers won increased pay and health benefits. They also won job protections against subcontracting. Contractual clauses against subcontracting were important, especially given the fact that NAFTA had just been passed 2 years earlier. The contract specified that the union be given 3 months' notice regarding any plans to subcontract out work. It also incentivized keeping work in-house by calling for increased benefits to laid-off workers and mandatory retraining and reemployment of workers displaced by subcontracting. These provisions came after IAM members rejected 2 previous contract offers. They were furious at the initial demands for concessions, even as Boeing executives were awarded multi-million-dollar stock options. At the time, the IAM and its members lauded this as a total victory. For a few years, Boeing abided by the contract they signed. Subsequently, Boeing bosses have routinely violated their agreements. Many of these provisions were lost in the 2002 contract and then recaptured in 2008. But the next contract negotiations witnessed a renewed fight for job security. Over the past 2 decades, Boeing workers have seen massive layoffs, subcontracting, pension freezes and phase-outs, and relocation of their work. All while the company rakes in billions of dollars in profits, gets lucrative tax breaks and subsidies, and has close to 5,000 back orders for planes. Subcontracting clauses are important, but can only work when they are enforced. Victories like the winning strike in 1995 can serve as a reminder for workers today that if they stand together in solidarity, they can win better wages, hours, and conditions at the bargaining table.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I was reading a couple articles yesterday that said that there may be some talk of lowering some of the tariffs with China, maybe some with Japan. I think lowering the tariffs at this moment is a horrible idea. As I've said before, I am a supporter of using tariffs to balance out the advantages of poverty countries through slave labor or lax environmental regulations. I think I'm a big fan of domestic production for domestic consumption. We should be making things here in this country, and tariffs, I think, do address some of that. But here to share some thoughts on maybe if this is actually true, and if it's a good idea or a bad idea, I've asked our good friend Scott Paul to come talk with us. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick. It's always great to be with you, man.
So let's start with the tariff issue. Mm-hmm. Is there talk that we're going to start lowering some of the tariffs on China specifically? Is that actually something that's being discussed?
So that's a great question. The honest answer is that within the administration, I don't know. Outside of the administration, there are a lot of multinational companies who import an awful lot of products who would love to see the tariffs lifted. And Rick, as you know, there's no special love among kind of mainstream economists for the idea of tariffs. But they've had to eat some humble pie over the last couple of years, because when these tariffs went into effect back in 2018, 2019, no inflation effect at all. We saw manufacturing job gains. We've seen them continue. There's some inflation in the economy now. A lot of that is due to oil, COVID whiplash, stuff like that. There's little or no evidence at all, in fact, that tariffs have contributed to that. Yet some of these big businesses are saying, well, we don't like them. And they don't like them because they cut into their profit margin. But as you point out, there's a perfectly valid reason for them. They can be a great equalizer. I mean, if another country like China, for instance, we have multinational companies there taking advantage of exploited labor, of environmental controls that are deficient, massive government subsidies, in some cases, as we know, forced labor, slave labor in the Xinjiang region with the Uyghur population. Tariffs can help to level the playing field and ensure that we can bring some of the work home, or some of our allies are able to supply those products or whatever. But we shouldn't just reflexively think that it's a good idea to give that away, particularly because we've seen job gains in the steel industry. We've seen them all over manufacturing. There are almost, there's something like 750, 800,000 open manufacturing jobs right now. So the idea that this is somehow causing a huge amount of consternation is just something that's being overhyped by multinational companies that are making a ton of money as it is, Rick.
No, and here's the thing: you said a moment ago that some of the economists are eating some humble pie, and I would go, they're eating a lot of it because all of the things that they've told me over my lifetime have been dead wrong. Like, hey, let's give the rich everything that they could possibly want. Let's cut taxes down to bare bones because eventually it'll trickle down. Trickle down hasn't happened. Hey, let's give corporate America the ability to roll over their employees. Let's break unions because it's going to be good for flexibility for corporations. Yeah, we've done that, and look at what kind of a working class we have. So I'm kind of not taking anything economists say to me with any bit of reality.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. They got this wrong. They got the bigger China question wrong, which we can get to. You also mentioned Japan, and so I wanted to touch on that for a second. Japan wants to have steel tariffs lifted on its products. Okay, and those were put into place by the Trump administration on Japan and a bunch of other countries as well. They've stayed in place. The Biden administration negotiated a deal with our European allies to put a quota in place, which should still be helpful to the American industry. So you probably remember what happened with Japanese steel dumping back in the late 70s, early 80s.
I sure do.
And the impact that had on communities in Pittsburgh and Youngstown
and
in
Cleveland,
in Northwest Indiana. It was crazy. It was really bad. I mean, mills closed, tens of thousands of workers were laid off. And so the idea that Japan should kind of get a free ride even today on steel is also, I think, a bad idea. I mean, if we're going to negotiate with them, we should demand a lot in return. We shouldn't just give them a blank check because we've seen this before. And it did not turn out well for steel workers in America.
No, ultimately, and steel is one of those things that I would argue is a national security item. If we're playing football, we put the franchise tag on steel. That's something we got to keep because everything that we need, national security wise, is based on that. Not to mention our infrastructure, not to mention all the things that we produce. You need to have domestic production of steel, I think, more than just about any other item. And we've lost a huge part of that. I think you've said in the past that, what we produce is kind of the margin of error of what China's producing.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we hit peak steel output in the United States in the mid 1970s, and it's been downhill. Then that hadn't meant that demand has gone down because, as you point out, Rick, so much in our lives and our economy and our national security depends on it that the steel market has grown in the United States, but it's just been filled by imports instead of American steel. And today, China supplies about 55% of all the steel in the world. We're pretty far down the list now. And yeah, our steel output is not even equal to the number of what I call zombie steel mills in China that are making steel that no one needs at all. But they're just those zombie steel mills are alive just to make sure people are employed. But then the steel ends up getting dumped and it screws up the market. And it means, unfortunately, for steel workers in the United States and some other countries, it means they're out of jobs. Yeah. And so we do have to do something about it. Tariffs, are, if you can avoid them, sure, I guess that's a good thing to do, but you can't. In this case, there's no possible way to avoid them. It is the only leveler that we have, the only defense that we have for this industry. We don't want to be in a position where we're dependent on another country for armor plate or for high-tech electrical steel. Or for other things that go into national security, our infrastructure, homeland security. That just seems, have we learned anything from this pandemic or from natural disasters? That it pays to be a little bit resilient. It pays to have a little bit of capacity here. I hope so.
I hope so,
but
too.
Yet some people still say, no, forget about all of that. Let's try to find a reason to bring even more imports in.
You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Scott Paul. Scott's the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. You want to check out the work that they're doing, especially on this tariff issue. Because, one of the things that I get all the time, Scott, is, well, you're going to cause massive inflation. And see, we've got inflation. I've had this thrown at me a bunch of times. You and your tariffs. are tariffs causing the inflation that we're seeing? And I know you brushed over it a moment ago,
Yeah.
but directly, are they causing this inflation?
No, they're not. They're not causing inflation. And the way that we know that is that there is also inflation in other countries, okay, who don't have the steel tariffs. All right. The reason why there's inflation in the United States is severalfold. Number one, the price of oil has fluctuated, and when it's been on the rise, we see inflation in fuel prices. Okay. Number two, there's been whiplash because of COVID, where there's been, there was shrinkage in supply. Now demand's built up. People still aren't traveling as much as they have been, so they're buying all sorts of crap. I know, I see it all over my neighborhood. So when there's more demand, what happens? I mean, that kind of pushes the price up a little bit. That will get straightened out, and there are indications that the oil sector we'll see a little bit of less inflation there in the coming months. I have a strong sense, based on a lot of the research I've seen, that we'll be past this inflation conversation in 3 or 4 months. Okay?
That is the hope.
Yeah, and Fox News loves to hype it up because they want to show all sorts of problems with the Biden economy, even though employers are hiring, wages are growing. We have economic growth overall in terms of GDP, and all of this is extraordinary, coming out of a pandemic and doing this so rapidly with all of these challenges. And so they're looking to anything. But again, fundamentally, we've had tariffs in place broadly on China since 2018. There was no evidence of inflation 2018, 2019 before the pandemic. It's only put, kind of into the pandemic that we've seen a bit of this inflation. So, I mean, anybody who knows how to draw inferences would then say, well, it can't be the tariffs. But yet, no, some economists, some multinational companies want to say it's the tariffs that are causing this, when there's very good evidence that that's not the case.
No, I've been saying it for years. I think we should be tearing down this whole free trade mantra, and we should be competing on the right things, not on who's willing to work for poverty wages in desperate conditions. It's always been my view, and the big part of this is China. The sad reality is we opened that door too fast. We gave corporate America all they wanted, and they raced as fast as they could with our blessing and our money over there to exploit that cheap labor and that environmental regulation, which again, as we know, cheap labor and lax environmental regulations, heroin to our CEO class. And now they're complaining about intellectual property. They're complaining about all kinds of things. China's a huge problem, and 20 years in, it's bigger than it's ever been. And I don't know that we can rein this in. You've written a piece here, recently that kind of talks about, how are we going to fix it? We've mismanaged it the entire 20 years. How do we pull back and how do we fix this?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I just want to go back because when Congress had to pass something 21 years ago to allow China to come into the World Trade Organization. It had to get the blessing of the United States of America, and one of the pieces was getting rid of an annual trade review of China that was called Most Favored Nation status, which I know
was against that.
Yeah, that's right. It sounds very jargony, but that was the case. And I was against it too. And I remember our posters, and I have one behind me, but it said no blank check for China. We thought everybody was like, you guys are so backwards. You just don't get it. We got to be visionary here. If China gets wealthier, it's going to get more democratic. It's going to become part of the community of nations. It's going to build a middle class. They're going to buy all sorts of American products. This is going to be a win-win-win-win-win. I mean, they couldn't get enough wins in there.
Yeah, I remember.
Well, here we are 20 years later, 3.7 million jobs in the United States, most in manufacturing. We can directly attribute to what we call the China shock, the shock of imports that came into this country. We saw a wage effect, dampening wages, not only in manufacturing, but also in the other jobs in town, because once those manufacturing workers are out of work, they're competing for the other jobs that are left, and that drove wages down too. Did we see democracy in China? Hell no. We didn't see anything close to it. China is more totalitarian. They've taken liberties away from people in Hong Kong. They're threatening Taiwan. They've launched a genocide against the Uyghurs internally. They bully anybody, internally or externally, who dares to question their authority or way of doing anything. By definition, that's not democratic. And so it has not been a utopia. And then you're right, Rick, the multinational companies are like, oh, yeah, well, please do something because they're stealing our intellectual property. We have to be in China because the market's too big to ignore.
Yep. I have no sympathy for them being ripped off.
Please do something.
I have no sympathy for them being ripped off. But here's the other argument I get. The reason that it hasn't worked the way we thought it was, we haven't done it enough, Scott. We need to do more. We need to give them more and more and more until eventually they control everything. Yeah, boy, we've cut China a lot of slack. We cut them slack all through the Bush years, unfortunately, all through the Obama years as well. Trump kind of flailed around and did some things and, ended up cutting a deal that was substandard. And so Biden really does have a chance to change course here. And I do think he realizes that China is a bigger potential adversary, definitely a strategic competitor. We can't ignore it. We also can't expect China to change. And I think that's something he now understands that he probably didn't want to accept 20 years ago. Right.
And it means two things. We have to have a tough trade policy. We have to have a foreign policy that has collaboration when possible, but confrontation when necessary, okay, in diplomatic areas. And we have to have an economic policy that builds up our own strengths and capabilities so that we don't have to depend on China for rare earth minerals or lithium ion batteries or PPE or medicines that we need. And we have to have a strategy to make those in the United States. And I think the good news there is that this administration kind of understands that too. And they've already taken some steps. We have a long way to go. But I think they do understand that part. And so I don't expect Biden to get China 100% right, but I do expect him to get it more right than any president has so far.
And using this pandemic as kind of a strategic reset. And I got about a minute left because I'm looking at this moment and going, this is an opportunity for us to undo some of the last 20 years and actually start looking towards the future, rebuilding our manufacturing, promoting domestic products by Buy American policies, those kind of things, kind of like a strategic reset, break out the reset button and take us back a little bit. I think that's what we need to do.
100%. That's our strength. And we can have the economy if we have the intent. We can have that capability if we have that intent. If we leave it up to the big multinational companies, the importers will never get there because they're just chasing the dollar. They don't care about national security. They don't care about rebuilding the middle class. They don't care about having democracy as a core strength. But if we focus on that, we will be in a better place and we will be less dependent on China for critical things that we need in this economy.
Good stuff, Scott. I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Of course, Rick. Have a great night.
You as well. Our good friend Scott Paul. Make sure you check out the website, AmericanManufacturing.org. We'll get links out on social media, how you can do that. I didn't get to the whole Buy American Christmas, but make sure this Christmas holiday season, you're looking for American-made products, and they've got some ideas over at AmericanManufacturing.org. Quick break, right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1990. That was the day that 20,000 workers in the city of Fez, in the North African country of Morocco, went out on strike. Austerity measures had hit the country's working people hard during the 1980s. A drought had made the situation even worse. Unemployment rates for those under 21 had soared to higher than 30%. Two labor unions, the General Workers' Trade Union and the Democratic Confederation of Labor, called for a general strike. Government officials agreed to meet with the unions to discuss their demands. But the government would not agree to specific wage increases. Plans for the general strike moved forward. It is estimated that more than half of the Fez workforce participated in the general strike. Large numbers of workers in other Moroccan cities also participated in the action. In Fez, bus drivers showed their solidarity by joining the strike. In response, the government attempted to keep bus service going by putting police and soldiers behind the wheel. This angered many of the young demonstrators, and some threw stones at the scab drivers. Armed forces clashed violently with the strikers. The government claimed the strikers started the violence. The protesters pointed toward the police. A fire was started at the five-star Hotel Merendez in Fez. Other symbols of wealth, such as limousines, car dealerships, and banks, were also damaged. After the 24-day strike, Moroccan officials claimed that 2 demonstrators had been killed. But human rights groups disputed that number and said 33 had been killed. Many more were injured. Hundreds were arrested. After the strike, the government agreed to raise wages by 15%. Many protesters were tried for their participation in the demonstrations. Some received prison sentences as long as 10 years. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
1-866-416-RICK. 1-866-416-RICK. You got a question, comment, something on your mind, give us a call. 1-866-416-7425. So, going back to what Scott was talking about, this idea that we need to rebuild domestic production. We do. We've lost millions of jobs because of our horrible trade policies, not just with China. This idea that we're going to allow corporate America to run roughshod over this country. Look, that's where we've been almost from the start. The moneyed interests have always dominated our politics because they're able to make the economy do well or not well. And if you look at some of the stuff going on, some of it's kind of curious on how prices start going up right around the same time Biden takes office. And then it's easy to blame him for the oil prices because oil kind of drives this stuff, which is why I'm glad he's moving full headwind into moving to electric vehicles. This is a move I think is a right thing, and some of his incentives are in the right direction. I know it angers the right so much that union workers might actually, do better. That you might want to encourage people to make decent wages, have decent benefits, and a say on the job. Which is why I'm thrilled to see that Ford, that Ford is building an electric vehicle here in the U.S. and GM, I guess, they plan to convert their Orion assembly plant that's in suburban Detroit into a hub for their electric pickup. That is a big thing, and that could mean, with its battery factory in Lansing, those two places could create about 2,700 good family-sustaining union jobs. The kind that you can retire from, the kind that you can buy a home with, send your kids to college with, have some dignity and respect on the job. That's pretty big stuff. Again, it comes down to policy initiatives. And, talking with Kevin Gannon a little bit ago, the fact that I blame a lot of what's happened, middle 70s, the organizing that came out of the Powell memo, the organizing that came out of the Treatise to Save Free Enterprise, which was all about taking over academic institutions because they were afraid that, we were making kids too liberal because they were talking about caring for others and equal rights and that kind of, that hippie liberal thinking stuff. That had to be broken. Had to break up those unions because those workers were getting a little uppity for their own good. How dare they think that they can go to the same places that the wealthy go to? Which reminds me, it just popped into my head. I remember having a conversation with my grandfather. This is going back 30 years, probably even longer than that, because we were talking about I had just got a union job, and he was like, hey, that's great. You hope it stays around because the attacks are coming on, because he saw it through his lifetime. And I go, so, when did kind of those, hey, when did you see this start kind of thing? And he said, I can tell you when I thought things had gone too far. And he told the story of in the late 60s, that he had taken my grandmother to see a play downtown, which anybody who knows my grandfather knows that is not something he was ever capable of. But for her being, it's their anniversary. It's, hey, we're going to do something nice. Took her down to the Playhouse down in downtown Cleveland. Got a reservation for the top of the town. The best restaurant in the city. All this stuff. And he said he walked in, and his boss was at the restaurant trying to get a table, and there were no tables for him. My grandfather had made a reservation, so they had a table. So he went and sat down while the boss was waiting. And he remembered thinking at the time that this is not going to go well. That he's going to take something, something for this. So they have their dinner, and they have a nice dinner, and they leave and they go to the play. And just before the curtain goes up, there are 2 seats next to my grandmother and grandfather. There are 2 seats open. And as the curtain goes up, and this is the kind of luck that I have, the kind of cloud that I would live under. I guess it's been passed down. Wouldn't you know, those 2 seats were his boss and his boss's wife, who came like 5 minutes late, and it had to disrupt everything. And people were all, in a huff and a kerfuffle, and they're all upset. But the boss was fuming. And like for a month, he heard about that. And he said, that moment, while it was funny, while it was fun, that moment you go, they don't want us in their world. And I think back to that moment and you go, this is where the wealth class, and this is where I go, it's not about right, left. It's not about Democrat, Republican as much as it is up and down. They don't want us in their world. They don't want us getting the table before they do. They don't want us at the play before they get there. They're special. And this is where that whole attack on unions really kind of began out of. Because workers were starting to get a little uppity, saying, our kids have a right to go to college. Our kids should have, certain things. We want good education. We want safe neighborhoods. We want opportunities. The working class was getting a little big for their britches. And that had to be quashed, which is what the Treatise to Save Free Enterprise by Lewis Powell, and I suggest you read it. It's very short. It's like 16 pages. But it does lay out in detail the game plan. And you could go, well, was this the game plan, or was it just one of them? It was one of them, but it is the most famous because Lewis Powell then became, now understand, Lewis Powell was a moderate Democrat at the time. He was then nominated and confirmed to the Supreme Court by Richard Nixon. So here's the guy going to save free enterprise, going to eventually be sitting on the Supreme Court. Yeah, a lot of problems there. A lot of problems. And you see this whole shifting of our court to one of, social rights, to one of expanding liberty, to one of, a corporatocracy. And this is where we are in this moment. And you look at the fact that policies for the last 20, 30, 40 years have decidedly been going that way more and more often. This Supreme Court, almost 3/4 of the time when the Chamber of Commerce puts a brief in on a case, they win. The moneyed interests never seem to lose. And that's a frustrating thing. But I always remember that little story of, workers had just, gotten a little big for their britches, driving a new car. It's just one of those things. I'd love to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. But just something that popped in my head. Real quick, a new poll out. I guess this isn't surprising, given the fact that we are a divided country. But the new poll points out that, according to Axios, half the country, 51% of the people that they surveyed, think it should be illegal to deny service or employment to somebody who's unvaccinated. 55% of Republicans, 46% of Democrats hold that view. I mean, we are split right down the middle. I mean, if I'm sure if you did it the poll another day, it would be just 49%. That's how split we are. And I've said from the beginning, our government is not going to be able to deal with this. We're politically incapable. Because, look, you've got a media machine on the right telling people, don't cave, don't surrender, stay unvaccinated. And you go, but you're literally killing people. They don't care. The hosts of the show, all vaccinated. Telling people, don't do it, which is kind of crazy. And as I've said for quite some time, I don't think our government can or should be doing these mandates anymore. I don't think we can get to it. I think this is now capitalism is going to have to decide. And as I said, last week, I've got a relative who, the company he works for said, you don't have to get vaccinated. We're going to incentivize it. We're going to give you a bonus if you do. We're going to give you days off if you get the sniffles. We want you to be vaccinated. We want you to protect yourself. We need you to protect yourself. We need to protect our employees. So you being unvaccinated, potential of getting it and sharing it is raised. The potential of you getting sick, all that, much worse. It's bad for our business. It's bad for our employees. Get vaccinated. That's the message. But if you don't, we can't make you. We're not going to fire you, but we're just going to charge you more for your health insurance. And a relative of mine said, $1,500 a year. I'm now looking at this story coming out of Kroger, where the giant supermarket chain is now saying that for their non-union employees, for their salaried employees, for all the company employees, they're going to be charged an additional $50 a month to cover the cost of their health insurance. The spokesperson for the company said, as we prepare to navigate the next phase of the pandemic, we are modifying policies to encourage safe behavior, including vaccination. They are offering a $100 incentive to employees who become fully vaccinated. It's a little bit of something. But at the end of the day, if you don't do it, you're going to pay more. And this is where, I've said from the beginning, this is where we're going to end up being. This is how it's going to have to end up. Because what we know and what I learned yesterday, sitting in an ER all day, is that overwhelmingly the people who are in the hospital are the unvaccinated. And overwhelmingly the people who are really sick are the unvaccinated. So if you're an insurance company, just a bean counter looking at reality, the unvaccinated are going to cost us more money. The unvaccinated are going to cost our health systems much more money, going to put more stress on our health system, going to cause other people their lives as well, because the resources are going to be overwhelmingly sucked up by people who didn't get vaccinated. But hey, that's their right. The right keeps telling us. They have the right to absorb all of our resources and do these kind of things. And look, I generally don't disagree, but there's a point at which you go, I don't know. I don't know if a hospital that's full of people who didn't even try to help themselves, and I know this is a slippery slope, but if you didn't even try, I don't know. And that's where I give the credit to the nurses and the doctors and all the folks who were working at that hospital. They were doing their jobs diligently and they were working hard and have been going through this for months. Now, Kroger, they're not the only one doing it. We saw Delta Airlines saying that they were going to have to pay a $200 monthly surcharge for their health insurance. There are other companies that are doing the same thing. So I think this is probably how it's going to happen. This is probably how we're going to move forward. And I think some of the mandates are going to go away because I think, politically we realize we're not moving the needle. The number of people who've been vaccinated at this point are probably where we're going to reach the number. Those of us who have been vaccinated will probably end up getting boosters and vaccines into the future for a couple of years. That's probably going to be the norm. Fauci's probably right. You're probably going to have to keep up with this a little bit. Am I thrilled with that? No, because I never got a flu shot. This is a little different. Our bodies don't have immunity to this. And you go, well, that's how you get immunity. Well, I don't quite know at this point if that's the right direction. Especially when I saw it firsthand. Normally you read these reports, you hear these stories. When you actually are sitting there watching, as there are people sitting in the ER just waiting for waiting's sake because there's nowhere to put them. When you've got people who are infected, who are symptomatic, who are coughing and hacking and miserable, just sitting in a hallway because there's nowhere to put them. That really kind of sends home a message. Very, very strange times. Also, one of the stories I found very interesting today. A listener sent me this, and I hadn't seen the CEO of best.com or better.com. I have never heard of better.com. I know nothing about better.com. Evidently, they are a mortgage company. Did not know that. But evidently, their CEO fired 900 employees over Zoom because he claimed he wanted to create a leaner, meaner, hungrier workforce. So after the big, blowout, because you fired 900 people via Zoom, he puts out a PR statement saying, I want to apologize for my handling of the layoffs. I failed to show the appropriate amount of respect and appreciation for the individuals who were affected and for their contributions to better. He didn't write this. This was a crisis manager who said, you gotta do something. This is the same guy who evidently emailed employees that said you're, quote, you are too damn slow. You're a bunch of dumb dolphins, and dumb dolphins get caught in nets and eaten by sharks. So stop it right now. You are embarrassing me. Yeah, would you work for this guy? Would you want to work for him? This is the guy who also threatened a former partner to set him on fire. They've relieved him of his duty, and the board of better.com has hired a company outside to come in and do an assessment of the culture there at better.com. And I'm going, maybe do better.com? I don't know, but this is the kind of stuff that you just go, wow. Now, they did finish up with, we have so much work to do. We hope that everyone will refocus on our customers and support each other to continue to build a great company and a company we can be proud of. This is not how you treat people, guys. But it's that last line that got my attention. It's that corporate speak that we hear so often. It said, hooray, let's build a team. The best company ever. Yeah, let's do that. One that makes huge profits that benefits shareholders. One that meets the demands of our customers to the detriment of our families. One where workers can be fired at the drop of a hat for no reason whatsoever via Zoom. Yeah, let's build that. And the sad reality is, people need these jobs. So they put up with this garbage. Scary, crazy stuff. I'll tell you, just infuriating. Just infuriating. But, sadly, I hear these stories all the time. And you know what they all have in common? None of them have a union contract. Things would be a lot different. Just my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, union busting. Multi-billion-dollar industry. Corporate America spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to deny people their right to join and form unions. When we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit about just how big this is. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1852. That was the day socialist leader Daniel de Leon was born in Curacao to Dutch Jewish parents. As a young man, he traveled Europe. He settled in New York City and earned a law degree from Columbia University in 1878. De Leon joined the Socialist Labor Party in 1890 and became the editor of its newspaper, The People. His book, Socialist Landmarks, consisting of a series of lectures, became wildly popular. These lectures included Reform or Revolution, What Means This Strike, The Burning Question of Trade Unionism, and Socialist Reconstruction of Society. De Leon warned of reforms under capitalism as illusory. He argued for revolutionary socialism and soon assumed leadership of the Socialist Labor Party. As a former member of the Knights of Labor, he was critical of the American labor movement, often referring to the AFL as the American separation of labor for its business unionism and refusal to organize any but the most highly skilled white craft workers. De Leon also took a strong stand against racism in the socialist movement, stating, quote, "Why should a truly socialist organization of whites not take in Negro members, but organize these in separate bodies? On account of outside prejudice, then the body is not truly socialist." De Leon was among the socialist leaders at the founding 1905 Conference of the Industrial Workers of the World. By 1908, he and others looked to effect social change through the Socialist Party and existing trade union movement. This put them at odds with the direct action perspective of the IWW. Many left the IWW at this point, including De Leon and socialist leader Eugene V. Debs. When he died in 1914, more than 30,000 turned out for his funeral.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Our quote of the day from Confessions of a Union Buster. Union busting is a field populated by bullies and built on deceit. The only way to bust a union is to lie, distort, manipulate, threaten, and always attack. And look, we've known this stuff for years. This is not new. It's finally people are starting to pay attention to some of the underhanded stuff that's been going on. And thank you, Amazon, for that. That's what really brought our attention to it. But we're seeing it in a lot of other places as well. Starbucks, another place where this has gotten a little bit of attention, which is why I'm so happy to see our friends over at Capitol in Maine have done a whole series on the inside of the secretive world of union busting, where these people make huge money to deny people their basic right to a voice on the job. And what's interesting is companies are spending wild amounts of money to deny workers their rights. And I would argue spending multiples of what it would cost them just to negotiate a decent contract and treat their employees with a little bit of dignity and respect, because it's not about that. It's about pure unadulterated power. And here to share some thoughts on their series, I've asked Marcus Barnum to come talk with us. Marcus is a special project editor there at Capitol in Maine. CapitolinMaine.com is their website. Marcus, thanks for taking some time for us.
Thank you for having me, Rick. Good to be here.
So let's get into why'd you guys do this investigative piece? Why'd you go into this?
Well, I'll tell you, it came out of our, we've been doing this 5100 project, which focuses on income inequality. We've been doing that since May. And part of that story is explaining why income inequality has gotten worse and worse over the years, especially in the last 3 or 4 decades. And one of those reasons is obviously the decline of unions. How union membership has gone from 20% in the 80s to about 10, 11% now. And we started to look into, okay, what's the way to tell the story of the decline of unions? One way and one factor is the aggressive campaign fought by corporate America to stop organizing efforts. And what's behind that? These union busters. And people think of union busters, they think of like the Molly Maguires, these like stories from the coal mines in the 1890s where they had Pinkerton detectives and troopers hired by the mine owners. And they don't really realize how ubiquitous this is now, where so many companies from small mom and pop shops to major, obviously Amazon, as you mentioned, and Kellogg's and others, these major multinationals that hire and have spent the estimated $340 million a year on what they call the union avoidance industry,
right?
Which has obviously come in to strike fear and intimidate workers to prevent them from organizing. So that was the impetus for doing the story. And the more we looked into it, the more angles there were. So the initial story was how much is being spent. And then the other story was looking at inside that world, the tactics they use and how they've changed in the last 30, 40 years. And then it became looking at how effective they are and the surveillance technology, how a lot of technology that's very common at workplaces now, from email monitoring to social media tracking, is kind of being used by these companies to kind of sidestep a lot of labor law restrictions on surveillance, especially during an election.
No, and I think Amazon was a perfect, again, understand, and we both understand this. I don't know that our listeners do. Nothing that Amazon did in Bessemer, Alabama was particularly innovative. None of it was particularly new. This is all stuff that these union busters have been doing for decades. The difference of what we saw in Bessemer is people were paying attention, having people walking around with sandwich boards, with slogans, anti-union slogans, plastering the bathroom walls with anti-union propaganda, having a mailbox with cameras trained on it so they know who put ballots in, having the police come and harass organizers. None of this stuff, none of it new. It's just that finally we're paying attention, which is why I think your series is so enlightening and so important for the average everyday worker to realize, to read, and to understand, so that if they go through it, they can recognize what's coming and maybe how to overcome some of it.
Right. No, definitely. I mean, a lot of people think it was obviously disappointing for a lot of people to see what happened in Bessemer, to have the election lost. But I think people saw it as kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, that it's a step, and that maybe the next time there's an Amazon warehouse that, goes and tries to do an election, that might fail too. But then the third or fourth might actually win. And it's sort of a long game. I think people are realizing there is a resurgent labor movement, and you see a lot of activity among young workers, especially in the gig economy, and a lot of those types of companies that don't have benefits and don't treat their workers well, and have long been immune to unionization, but it's starting to, there's a rumble. Things are starting to move. Yeah. You see Google workers in tech who are already forming little groups and collectives that are strategizing, and it's going to happen.
No, it's going to happen at some point, and that is the hope. I mean, ultimately, I'm looking at what happened in Illinois this past weekend at the Amazon facility there, at that candle place in Kentucky, where
and the Kellogg strike too is a big deal.
Right, but I'm looking at these first these groups of workers who the story now is coming out that they were intimidated to stay on the job because they didn't have a voice, they didn't have a backing to say, hey, no, I need to be home with my family, I need to seek shelter, I need to leave. They were kind of intimidated into staying, and this has everything to do with that they don't have the power of a voice on the job, because ultimately you have these organizations who deny these folks their rights.
Yeah, you can imagine how those workers would have, how things would have worked out if those workers had been unionized. And
no, I know how Marcus, I know how that would have worked out, because I've had it happen to me in the past. I've had a supervisor say, no, you've only got an hour left before you need to be home. Right. And I said, I'll see you in a couple of days. I got to go home. Knowing that I had the power and the ability to have backing to do that. I want every person to have that.
Yeah. I hear you. Absolutely.
Now, one of the things that I thought was most important, what really caught my eye, was the idea of this kind of surveillance that's going on. Because I don't think a lot of people understand that corporate America is surveilling us at every point, not just as employees, but as citizens as a whole. But the ones that they get to do as employees, that's really invasive stuff. And we have no say in it because, well, we're their employees.
Right. And also that a lot of those technologies, whether it's, email tracking or checking social media, or even like cameras, or even the ID cards, and, being able to basically find out where people are in the building, that's become such a standard part of the modern workplace that people don't think of it as unusual. Back in the old days, if you had like cameras everywhere following you around the office, you would have been like, what the hell's going on here? But it's so normalized now that people don't even pay attention to it. And yet it's being used by a lot of these companies to track and look for organizing. They're kind of like, oh, why? And they do profiling. They're like, why is this African-American woman who's single, who we know seems to be pro-union, why is she meeting with these 3 other guys who've they've never talked before? And they're over in the corner having coffee. What's going on there? Yeah. There's a lot of that kind of surveillance, which is, under the law, under labor law, is technically illegal to do that kind of surveillance of union activity or organizing activity during an election.
But if you're just, we're just tracking our employees, want to know whether if they're being productive or not, that is not illegal.
Right, right. So there's a lot of that that's been happening where these companies are kind of sidestepping what they call ULPs, unfair labor practices, or violating labor law, and which doesn't really result in too many fines, but it's a way to avoid those kinds of laws and know what's happening with the union, so they can kind of keep track of it and marshal their resources and their anti-union activists and consultants to combat the organizing efforts. And they've been pretty successful.
No, they've been really successful. I mean, I've been a part of campaigns where these union busters come in, and you can see the fear that they instill in people, because fear sadly works. You listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Marcus Baram. Marcus is a special projects editor there at the Capital in Maine site, capitalinmaine.com, their website. You want to check out the most recent piece on union busting, this investigative piece, the inside the secretive world of union busting. There's a number of articles here, well worth the time getting into. Now, we're talking about surveillance. There were a couple of years ago, I saw a story somewhere up in Massachusetts where some of the employees had voluntarily allowed themselves to be chipped so that they could get things out of the vending machine easier, which was the sale point. Well, you can clock in and you don't have to remember your badge, and you can get things out of the vending machine. Won't that be so convenient? I'm going, wait a second. You're going to allow yourself to have an RFID chip put in your hand where if there's a reader around, they're tracking your every movement, and you're okay with that? What is it about us that goes, that's okay?
I think what it is, it's a little bit like that fable of how to, a frog that gets boiled slowly, that he ends up, being cooked because he doesn't realize as the temperature keeps increasing 1 degree at a time. It's that slow creep, which one of the people we talked to in the article talks about, where the surveillance has grown over the last 20, 30 years, and now we don't even notice it. Think about, like in New York, I walk around all the time, but I don't always pay attention to the cameras. And sometimes whenever you see crime reports, local crime reports, robbery at some bodega, they always have video footage. And you realize, of course they have video footage because there's cameras everywhere. And so it's very similar in the workplace, where you're not always paying attention to how much of your email, your computer activity, your actual physical movements are being tracked and monitored, and your social media use, even outside of the office, of course. And it's sort of a slow creeping effect that people don't realize.
Yeah, but it comes back to that magic statement, though, Marcus. If you've got nothing to hide.
Yeah.
I didn't even know how you answer that with, I have nothing to hide, but I still don't want people spying on me. I still don't want people looking over my shoulder every minute of the day, tracking my movements, tracking my thoughts. When's that coming?
Right. No, exactly. And especially if you're part of a union election and there's a lot of activity, and maybe you're organizing and meeting and strategizing with people. You don't want to have a Zoom meeting like we talk about it in one of the articles, and all of a sudden some managers crash the meeting, and then they right away identify all the people who are there by looking at the Zoom profiles. You don't want to have that. You want to have a little bit of privacy where you can actually, have your quiet meetings where you can strategize without management finding out everything you're doing.
So that would have been. You guys have gone through and identified
back in the day.
You guys have gone back and identified a bunch of areas. Have you come out with, how do we combat this stuff? Have you come out with a way of undoing some of this and overcoming some of this stuff?
From talking to a lot of union organizers who are optimistic, a lot of it is, I think that in some ways a lot of unions, especially the big unions, have not been as aggressive in the last 20, 30 years in terms of really like saying we can win this, and going in and educating workers and using their own technology in a smart way. It doesn't have to be always to the detriment of unions. Unions can use, obviously, social media, other tools, texting and other tools like group chats to coordinate and strategize and to get the word out about things that are happening to those employees, how to organize better and more effectively, how to win support. That can all be done by unions, and is being done just that sometimes it's more difficult than other times.
Yeah.
Like I see the Dollar General thing is interesting, where as we were reported, Dollar General spent literally tens of thousands of dollars to defeat an effort by 5 workers in Connecticut to organize. They spent that much money because they were scared that that would end up energizing their tens of thousands of employees at the thousands of Dollar General stores around the country.
Yeah.
And that's why they spent that much money. And I can see there's already been more and more activity at other Dollar Generals around the country. And there'll be a tipping point at some point where enough of those workers realize that they have more in common.
Yeah, no, we're seeing it at Starbucks right now. You're seeing,
Right.
you had the Starbucks in Buffalo that voted to be the first unionized Starbucks, and now in Boston, there are a couple that are going to be moving forward on NLRB elections, where possibly you're going to see a snowball of a couple more and a couple more until eventually you may have a couple hundred across the country that are organized and setting a better standard of living for their workers. I don't see a downside to this.
Yeah, and a lot of it depends, of course, on what happens on the agency level too, like the Department of Labor. Obviously, under some administrations, tends to more focus on union problems and going after unions, and under generally Democratic administrations, they tend to stand up more for worker rights. So it kind of struck me, I thought it was a BFD, as they say about Biden, that last Friday, Biden tweeted twice about the right of every worker to organize and about the Kellogg strike. And that was pretty shocking. And that was a big deal to have the president of the United States be that assertive about unionization.
And as I tweeted out, that's the reason I voted for him. Because we need a government that's going to promote people's ability to join and form unions, to collectively bargain. If we're going to solve some of our societal problems, if we're going to solve inequality, if we're going to give people opportunities into the future, if we're going to have a fair distribution of wealth in this country, that's where it begins. Last question I've got for you. You guys have written a piece on what I was talking about earlier, the moneyed interests basically quashing any research, any investigation, any education. You look at the fact that there are no labor pages in any newspapers. When I was a kid, the Cleveland Press had a labor page. Every major newspaper had a labor reporter. You had, in every university, there was somebody who had a labor center. Those have all been destroyed, and it's the moneyed interest who have done this to eviscerate any academic response for labor, to stand up against the attacks from business.
Yeah. No, definitely. And that was like the last story in our series was, as you mentioned, the Howard Labor Studies departments around the country. And there are a few left. Cornell is a big one. There's one at Rutgers. UCLA has a labor center, which do a lot of important research about workplace issues. And they're seen as kind of pro-union advocacy organizations. So corporate America has, gone after them, and conservative lawmakers to pull funding from those state universities. And at Cornell, we talked to Kate Bronfenbrenner, who's one of the most prominent labor studies academic in the country. And she says on the regular, her dean and her university at Cornell, they get dozens and dozens of calls from donors and alumni trying to fire her.
Wow.
Just exerting, bald-faced pressure just to fire her or get rid of her. And all kinds of intimidation of her and other labor studies academics, which is hard to imagine. These are just people working, studying, doing research. You don't really think of them as being a threat, but they're seen as a threat by a lot of corporate America.
Because they're doing the wrong kind of research, helping those working people. How dare they? But Marcus, I appreciate the time. You guys are doing great work there. I hope folks will check out the series, Inside the Secretive World of Union Busting. We'll get links out on how you can check out Capital and Maine's website. Marcus, thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Rick. Take care. All the
great
best
stuff. Marcus Baram, the special projects editor there at Capital and Maine, capitalandmaine.com, the website. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1995. That was the day machinists at Boeing ended their 69-day strike. 33,000 workers won increased pay and health benefits. They also won job protections against subcontracting. Contractual clauses against subcontracting were important, especially given the fact that NAFTA had just been passed 2 years earlier. The contract specified that the union be given 3 months' notice regarding any plans to subcontract out work. It also incentivized keeping work in-house by calling for increased benefits to laid-off workers and mandatory retraining and reemployment of workers displaced by subcontracting. These provisions came after IAM members rejected 2 previous contract offers. They were furious at the initial demands for concessions, even as Boeing executives were awarded multi-million-dollar stock options. At the time, the IAM and its members lauded this as a total victory. For a few years, Boeing abided by the contract they signed. Subsequently, Boeing bosses have routinely violated their agreements. Many of these provisions were lost in the 2002 contract and then recaptured in 2008. But the next contract negotiations witnessed a renewed fight for job security. Over the past 2 decades, Boeing workers have seen massive layoffs, subcontracting, pension freezes and phase-outs, and relocation of their work. All while the company rakes in billions of dollars in profits, gets lucrative tax breaks and subsidies, and has close to 5,000 back orders for planes. Subcontracting clauses are important, but can only work when they are enforced. Victories like the winning strike in 1995 can serve as a reminder for workers today that if they stand together in solidarity, they can win better wages, hours, and conditions at the bargaining table.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So every once in a while, I get books from different editors and people I've known throughout the years. And a good friend reached out to me and said, "Hey, I got this fabulous book about parenting, about all kinds of stuff, about politics. You definitely have to have this person on." And look, I'm flipping through the pages, I'm reading through the book, and it's this. It's kind of like the it takes a village kind of thing. Only it's just one person. And so I thought, no, let's have this person on to talk about her book. That's why I've asked Marjorie Margoles to come talk with us. She's a former member of Congress, TV journalist. She now serves as faculty on the Annenberg School at the University of Penn. She's got this new book out, and How Are the Children? Timeless Lessons from the Front Lines of Motherhood. Marjorie, thanks for taking time for us.
Well, thank you for having me.
So let me ask you, let's start with there. Like I said, I'm flipping through this book. It's kind of like, is this, it takes a village, only you're the village? Is this it?
Well, actually, when I started to write it, you start to write these things and people think, who knows? I'll back up a little bit. I adopted 2 kids before I got married somebody we had 6 girls when we got married. Then we had 2 boys. And then we had been taking in refugee families, and we took in a Vietnamese refugee family. The little boy was 4 years old. It turned out to be 1 mother, 1 little boy, 2 nephews, and then a husband who came in a year. And they lived with us for 25 years.
Wow.
It was.
So that you literally were a village then. I mean, I wasn't just making that up. I mean, you had some blended, some new, some borrowed, some adopted. You kind of had it all.
Yeah, well, and believe me, but the real story, I think, is Hillary, as in Hillary Clinton, wrote the foreword, and as I was writing the book, some of the kids wrote things, and one of the kids who wrote something was Vu, that 4-year-old. The 4-year-old is now an anesthesiologist, and he's the best. And as we were walking on a beach someplace on vacation, he said to me, "What would have happened to me had my folder been on a different desk that day?" And that's I thought, that's what our whole family's about. Yeah. I mean, it's this random group of people who have found I mean, they're all brothers and sisters, but they found their home in this place that we called home, and it was really interesting. So that's the way the book starts. Hillary wrote the foreword, and then Vu writes this story about how he came. He was a refugee. He was in Malaysia. They were told they had to swim from the boat to shore. His mother, they didn't know how to swim. Mother said, "I'm not going to do it without a tire." They were with cousin and aunt. Cousin drowned, and Vu tells this whole incredible story. He has 3 kids now. He's just wonderful. Yeah. But that's what a lot of this is about. And when I went through what the kids had written, I thought, no, Vu's story has to come first. Yeah. So that's actually where it starts.
So is this like an autobiography? I mean, is this like a parenting how-to, how to not maybe? Is this something to further political discussion? Because we got immigration issues coming up. There's a lot of these themes. Is it this? Is it, or is it all of that?
Yes. It's a little bit of everything. It is how strange things can happen. That I won this seat in Congress, which was I'm a Democrat, and it was a Republican seat, and it was just one of those crazy things. I came in the year of the woman, and I left in the year of Newt. It was one of those crazy things, and then I became the head of our delegation for the Fourth World Conference in China. So it is a little bit of a story. It's a little bit of a weave, and then I started an organization. Well, I could tell you right now. I mean, I started an organization called Women's Campaign International, right. And we empower women. Sometimes we work with politicians, sometimes we work with women on the ground. Right now, we are working very hard to get our women, whom we've been working with since 2006 from Afghanistan. We're trying to get our women out. So that's it. So it is kind of, in answer to your question, it's a little bit of all of these things and how I got to this place where we're trying really hard, where I have this wonderful team of trainers. One of our trainers is Joe Biden's sister.
Oh, wow.
Valerie. But we go all over, and we work with women who are farmers, and we work with women who are running for office. We've been in about 50 countries, and it's fascinating.
No, but it sounds fascinating. And I hope folks will take a look at the book. I listen to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Marjorie Margoles. She's written the book, And How Are the Children? Timeless Lessons from the Front Lines of Motherhood. We'll get links on how you can check that out. I found some of this stuff, kind of fascinating.
But let me tell you about the title and how the Maasai warriors. When you see a Maasai warrior, you don't say, "So how are you?" You say, "How are the children?" And that's the title for the book.
Okay, because I was going to ask you, how are the children, and which was hopefully going to lead us into a discussion about, about what you'd said about Foe. What would have happened if his folder would have been on a different desk? What is going to happen to these children who are coming in from other places? I mean, I guess this is where the policy stuff comes, because not everyone's going to have the happy ending story that you've got here. How do we do some of that stuff? Is there a way forward on that so that all kids have a shot?
It makes me so sad when refugees are looked at as if they're not going to. We are all. This is a country of refugees. Is it easy? It is not easy.
No.
And some of it has been handled very poorly, but. As I am, our family is a perfect example with Vu. I mean, who would have thought? Yeah. And then there were two other nephews who did just as well. These refugees some don't, but we can't kind of that broad brush that's so mean, that says that all they do is take from us. I'm someone who by the way. Vu's family was our 5th placement. The others were short, but they're wonderful. Yes, in answer to your question, this is a very tough one. our the border problem, the Mexican border problem is a mess.
Yeah.
The Afghanistan problem is a mess. But the people, the individuals who come in and see us as their answer are wonderful.
Yeah, but some people would argue, Marjorie, that we've got kids in this country that need help too. We've
Right.
got so many people in foster care. We've got so many people who are homeless. We've got so many things there. That old adage, charity begins at home. That seems to fly up a lot. How do you balance the two?
Well, I mean, we Women's Campaign International also has a program here we're in Philadelphia, and we work in the Philadelphia area with teenagers actually, and we share our program, the empowerment program, with girls. I think we do have to bring it home. I think we have to keep our eye on it, but
Right.
we're also very important to the world. We are we are the richest country in the world. Can we help everybody? Certainly not. But we can reach out to them. The stuff that we do, Women's Campaign International, has incredible ripple effect. We work with, for instance, when COVID hit, we were on our way to Kenya. And there was an enormous problem with young girls. We were doing some trainings with young girls. And because everything was closed down, in many of the villages around where we were going to work, the young girls were getting pregnant. So we switched gears and we did a program about the girls didn't know what consent was. It was extraordinary. And anyway, we did this program, we did a pilot, and then we spread it. But in answer to yes, we can't solve all the problems of the world, and we shouldn't.
No,
but we can't not, when people ask, we can't say no.
I'm with you. Again, the book, and How Are the Children? Timeless Lessons from the Front Lines of Motherhood. We'll get links out on social media, how you get there. Now, like I said, as I was flipping through it, some of the things that I came across, something that I'll probably use in my own parenting. Now, I only have 3 children. I have no idea how you deal with 11. I have no idea how you got through that, but you had this thing in there called the 12-word rule, something I think I'm going to try because I get accused of lecturing my kids.
No, not you. Oh, come on.
And the thing is, I sit behind a microphone all day, so words are something. I can get wordy a little bit. Life can get a little wordy. I'm going to try the 12-word principle.
Well, actually, it's not easy. I mean, it really is. You just have to, it takes a lot of thought. Well, it's the same thing. I mean, you remember when you were asked to write an essay, long was easy, short was difficult. But yes. And I get it. My kids give it back to me. I mean, I listen to them and I say, "Ooh, did I say that?" I always say you learn from the tough times. This is you learn from the tough times, and you learn from the rejections, and you learn from the disappointments. And I am so friggin' learned. I don't need. I usually use a different word.
Yeah,
but
that's in the book too.
But it's not that I don't want to learn anymore, but I do think I think I've learned a lot.
and look, this book shares a lot of it. I mean, your experience in being every type of mother possible. And I found the chapter on being a stepmother kind of interesting. Which kind were you? Were you the wicked stepmother? Where would you put yourself in that? Hansel and Gretel, Snow White. Where are you at?
No, I would say I'm a conciliator. I don't like conflict, and luckily the 4 girls were really lovely, and we're very close. But I don't think a lot of things are terribly important, so I don't go to the mat for most things. And the girls all got along; they really did like each other, and so a lot of it was luck.
Right.
But
I got 2 other quick questions for you. One is, I like the fact that, this seems to be a book about motherhood, but you kind of said, hey, that men can be parents too. And you talked about Peter, the house parent, and I thought that was something interesting, that it just, because I wanted to be the house parent. The difference was I made a little bit too much money, so that didn't happen. And my wife did a much better job than I ever could have. Our kids had been a mess if it were me, but I like the fact that men can do it too.
How old are your kids? How old are you?
19, 15, and 13.
Oh, it does happen so quickly, doesn't it? Oh my gosh.
Seems like just yesterday we carried them home.
It really is so true. The first child I adopted was 7. The second one I adopted was 6. So, and then of course, when we blended these families, and we have 21 grandchildren, which is a lot. That's a lot. That's a lot of grandchildren.
That's a lot. You're contributing to the overpopulation just a little bit, perhaps. I'm just kidding with you. Last question I've got for you on this. What are you hoping comes out of this? I mean, it's an interesting book. It's an interesting read. I suggested for people who want to be parents, this is a good thing. What are you hoping comes out of it?
I really do hope that it isn't right for everybody. It really isn't right for everybody. But if you think it's right for you, include other folks into your family, foster children, or now immigrants, because it is so rich. My kids honestly can land any place. They really can. I've one. Our youngest bio kid is an artist, and he's in Austria. Actually, he's just on his way home from Rome. But everybody says the same thing, especially about him. Man, he can get along any place. And so I just think that, and believe me, it wasn't always easy. Sometimes it was just like, oh my gosh, why did I ever get myself into this thing? But by and large, it's been a gift, and I've gotten much more out of it than they did. Well, a lot. I mean, I got a lot out. But I just think include people. It is so rich, and it's such a wonderful way to spend one's life. I think it's not right for everybody.
And you've shared it in this wonderful book, And How Are the Children? Timeless Lessons from the Front Lines of Motherhood, written by Marjorie Margoles. We'll get links out on social media, how you can take a look at that. Marjorie, it was great talking with you. Nice piece of work here. I wish you the best.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yep, anytime. Thank you so much. Seriously, check out the book, And How Are the Children? We'll get links out on social media on how you can do just that. We got lots to get to, lots to talk about all week long. So make sure you check out our website. So, in thinking about this book, I was reading through some of the stories that caught my attention. The lecturing one, something I do quite often, and I don't mean to. So as I'm reading through this, I'm thinking of my kids going, "Oh, Dad, enough! Stop with the lecture." My wife does it too. She calls me the professor, which is kind of mean. Kind of hurts my feelings. But no, I suggested it. It's one of those the good reads, and it didn't get too much into the political stuff because look, I mean, the political stuff is going to be crazy in the coming months and years. We have a massive problem with climate change that nobody seems to be addressing. So they're going to be refugee crisis after refugee crisis of people seeking high ground. And maybe this is the way forward. It's something that I've talked about with my wife. Maybe at some point down the road, once our kids are grown, maybe you go back and you do something like that. Because I think it's an amazing thing to adopt children, to take people in and help them. I think it really is an incredible thing if you have the resources. If you have the space, if you have the ability. It's not for everybody, as she pointed out, but I do think it's a pretty incredible thing. I remember a family that I knew years ago who this is kind of what their job was. They had like 6 kids that they did foster care for, and they had over a 40, 50 year span. They had like 40 kids. That had spent significant time that would come for Thanksgiving dinner. Their Thanksgiving dinners were, done at halls, because here you have, these 40 kids with their families and all of this, and just this massive. And I always thought, man, that's really, really fascinating, and really quite amazing. So check out the book. We'll make sure we get links out on social media. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Make sure you follow us on social media at Rick Smith Show on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Subscribe, like, comment, all of that stuff. Tell us what you think. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
In a world that's clogged and choking with a massive overdose of plastic trash, you will be heartened to learn that governments and industries are teaming up to respond forcefully to this planetary crisis. Unfortunately, their response has been to engage in a global race to make more plastic stuff and to force poor countries to become dumping grounds for plastic garbage. Leading this Kafkaesque greed fest are such infamous plunderers and polluters as ExxonMobil, Chevron, Shell, and other petrochemical profiteers. With fossil fuel profits crashing, the giants are rushing to convert more of their oversupply of oil into plastic. But where to send the monstrous volumes of waste that will result? The industry's chief lobbyist outfit, the American Chemistry Council, looked around last year and suddenly shouted, "Eureka! There's Africa!" In particular, they're targeting Kenya to become a plastics hub for global trade in waste. However, Kenyans have an influential community of environmental activists who've enacted some of the world's toughest bans on plastic pollution. To bypass this inconvenient local opposition, the dumpers are resorting to an old corporate power play: free trade. Their lobbyists are pushing an autocratic trade agreement that would ban Kenyan officials from passing their own laws or rules that interfere with trade in plastic waste. Trying to hide their ugliness, the plastic profiteers created a PR front group called Alliance to End Public Waste. But hello, it's not public waste. Exxon and other funders of the alliance make, promote, and profit from the mountains of destructive trash they now demand we clean up. This is Jim Hightower saying the real problem is not waste, but plastic itself. Rather than subsidizing more of the stuff, we should seek out and encourage people who are developing real solutions and alternatives.